Hello and welcome to episode 269 of The Crate and Crowbar. It is the 24th of January 2019. I saw those eyebrows, Tom Senior.
Quiet you.
It's got a 2 in front of it, so it's not the same number. My name is Chris Thurston, and I am joined by the eyebrows and indeed the rest of Tom Senior.
Yeah, here I am.
And all of Tom Francis.
Hello. I come as a unit.
Absolute unit. Tom, you, either, I suppose, are the, bearer of the only news we could think of. Is that right?
Yeah. Yesterday I saw that, the SteamWorld folks responsible for SteamWorld Dig and SteamWorld Heist have announced SteamWorld Quest, which is, it looks to me like their take on Slay the Spire. Like it's a sort of, I don't know if it's a roguelike, but it's, a series of fights that you resolve by playing cards. And, unlike Slay the Spire, you seem to have like a little group of people that you're fighting as. And I don't know how the actual mechanics work in terms of whether you can like freely switch between them or whether it's, the game decides who gets a turn. But the art is absolutely gorgeous. It's really sumptuous. And it was surprising. I'm one of the people who doesn't have a problem with the art in Slay the Spire. I like it. But, it was surprising how much of a difference it made to have like super polished, like, you know, gorgeously crisp, art with very consistent style all the way through. Just looks really exciting.
Well, of course, that even does qualify as news, which is Slay the Spire is out now. It's out of early access.
I read an AMA with them, and apparently when they launched in early access November last year, basically bombed, like didn't sell hardly anything for the first 3 months. And then like very slowly the streamers they reached out to started to cover it, and they started to tell their friends about it, and then suddenly it just blew up.
Are you saying that the fact that we've talked about it on this podcast maybe more than any other game Spelunky and Dota had no impact on their early month sales at all?
Well, I don't think we started talking about it back then because I didn't discover it till like January after that.
Right. Yeah, I don't think I know when it actually came out, to be honest.
Yeah. So it's been a relatively short period that we've been talking about it intensively. And we were responsible obviously for all of its success past that point.
We're influencers now.
Yeah.
It was good.
Yeah.
It's one of those successes where, like, apart from just liking the game a lot, I also kind of feel like they earned it because they've been doing weekly updates for, like, the entire year, I think. And it's just a crazy amount of work they put into it.
Yeah. I mean, and if anything, though, the thing that would have tipped it over the edge would have been your extended Slay the Spire wanking analogy, Tom, from the mid part of last year.
If you want me to sell your game with extended wanking analogies, I'm available for consultancy. My fees are extremely high. I'm delighted it's doing well. The addition of third class, about sort of like mid to late last year showed me that the game still has like tremendous scope for expansion, not just from modders, but from the devs themselves. And I would happily buy more character classes for that game or, you know, extra tiers to the Spire or extra enemies and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I really hope to see more from them.
Almost bought it today because I think I'm the one of us who hasn't played it because I decided to wait until I tend to wait until things are actually out now generally because it helps make it feel more manageable. The only reason I haven't is because I kind of wanted, you know, to pick up something to play that, I would talk about on the podcast. And I felt like if I showed up and said, hey, so I finally played Slay the Spire and here's everything I think about stuff that you guys feel have trodden over and fully consumed and moved past a year ago.
The thing is though, I haven't fully consumed it because it's coming out on Switch.
Yeah.
And that means that all journeys are fixed forever now.
Yeah, that feels like the end point of all game development is, can I lift it up out of its little cradle and take it to the loo with me?
And Switch says yes.
No other game platform does.
I have so many games on Switch now that I already own on PC just because I want to play Into the Breach. Or, you know, carry that onto a train journey or something like that. Slay the Spire. Like, there's so much good indie stuff appearing on that platform, which for a Nintendo platform is kind of nuts.
And in many ways, you know, I feel like, I remember when we were at the Minis Monthly event in our Airbnb, of course you have Diablo on the Exactly.
Yeah, I travel with the whole base unit now. So, like, I was in the Airbnb, I just set it up, plugged it into some stranger's television and played Diablo on a massive screen. Yeah. And showed Chris how my magic belt breaks the game.
And it's very good. Cause, you know, because you can just summon Warframe wherever you are, I suppose.
I've not, I'm worried about actually dying. I just of some kind of overdose of grindy games. Warframe, I'd have to form yet another account on the Switch because I don't think they cross over.
It's funny, the Switch. I appreciate PC Games Podcast and everything, but getting into it, like, the thing I've realized, like, I very much like the Switch and I very much like the PlayStation 4. And the reason I like the PlayStation 4 is it's basically the best television box. You know, it does all the television things, it does all the film things, and that's predominantly what I use it for. Really, like, it's probably one of the devices, you know, I use the most, except my PC. It's just the thing it gets used for is Netflix and Amazon Prime and stuff. Whereas the thing about the Switch is it feels like it's the actual game machine in the house, because it's the one I wish all games were on. Like, I slightly resent playing a game at my PC, to be honest, even though they look nicer and there's a nice big screen and things, because it just feels nice to, you know, when I was working through loads and loads of really big deadlines towards the end of November and in December, I just had my Switch on the desk next to me at all times. And in like the 10-minute break you get while waiting for someone to reply to a message and things, you can just play Smash Brothers. You're allowed to do that. It's really good and it's right there. And then when you're allowed to play big Smash Brothers, you just walk downstairs and plug it into the television. and it continues. It's kind of revelatory.
Smash Brothers is great as well.
It is also great. I wish we, man.
We can't talk about it.
Yeah.
But they're extremely good. I increasingly feel like, a barrier to sitting up to play a game and to, you know, having to get into position for a PC game. And it's almost like, it feels like more of more effort, more of an endeavor.
Yeah. That's 90% of the Slay the Spire addiction for me is I can play it with a gamepad and it works really well with a gamepad. And so I just slouch and
Yeah, I think maybe that's the reason that for me the Switch feels like such a kind of like logical extent of what console games offer. It's like, I remember when I started playing console games again, it was because I was working on a bookazine, the worst word in the English language. And I just and I was working on it loads and loads and loads. And so my PC just became a workplace.
Yeah.
And technically, I can go to the taskbar, load Steam and then double click and then I'm in a game. But that wasn't a sufficient disconnect for me to feel at ease. You know, it was like, that's, you know, so I literally started playing Dark Souls on the Xbox because it was something that required me to go somewhere else and sort of like stake out a different area for me to relax in. And I think that's an area that the PC has never been good at, is like letting you not feel like you're at work to some extent. And I felt that more intensely as I've gotten older, basically.
I've refreshed my old, sort of desktop setup now. So I've got a new chair. And that's helped enormously, actually, because my old one was fucked.
Yeah.
So it's now more of a comfortable thing. I also got a mouse mat that lights up.
Why, Tom?
It was a moment of Black Friday madness. I'm not sure if I've explained it, talked about it on the pod. But, my keyboard and my mouse mat and my mouse are all synced up to the same RGB lighting piece of software now. And, I can make them dance and,
You haven't answered my question.
That's why. I made it all glow. My first act was to make it all glow gold because they're like black. So I created a kind of like Deus Ex Human Revolution vibe.
Oh, see, now I'm interested.
And there was it crossed my mind. It's like, I could get some like little ambient lights out the back of the PC. So this whole area just kind of glows with this futuristic Deus Ex.
You've actually sold me, because maybe this is what I was missing. Like, I'm getting back now. I don't want to sound like too down on the PC. Like, I'm getting back now into the habit of like loading up a PC game in my lunch break and playing it for a bit. Maybe what I need is a full lighting setup, which literally transforms the environment from the grey and the sort of like, I don't know, pale yellow light of work mode to the erratic neon of game mode activated.
Yeah, that razor hue of green suddenly switches on the gaming receptors in your brain and it's like, time to game.
Yeah. Maybe that was good branding this entire time and we just didn't know.
Yeah, just had a
actually,
plan.
Until you said it, honestly hadn't occurred to me that you could use all these RGB things for anything other than showing a rainbow. Like, the idea of setting them all to the same colour is like mind-blowing. Whoa.
It's
could
really
be
nice,
actually
though.
tasteful.
You can make them, there's various settings. I'm not going to go on about this for long. I'm talking about how my keyboard lights up. But there's a setting that's just called breathing. And it just does a sinister kind of Doctor Who ebb just in the background, and I do quite like it.
As in it's breathing, or it's following your breathing?
No, that'd be fucking strange. That's the next level though, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, it breathes by itself. It's its own internal life.
Much more reassuring.
Yeah. Okay,
that's real strange.
Yeah, why did I do that? Who knows? It's cool though, it's a very clacky one.
The mouse pad?
No, it is a hard mouse pad and it does clack, but the keyboard's got laser switches and it's really loud. There's lasers in the switches for every single key. There's a laser, and when you press the button down that's blocking the laser, it shoots through and gives you and registers the key press. It's absolutely absurd.
It's amazing how much new technology they can invent to do something we can already
Completely basic.
totally.
Yeah, it was an absurd flash of madness on Black Friday, but there you go. It was heavily discounted.
Yeah, like mechanical keyboards are amazing, but I've realized this as someone who works entirely from home now for a company and has a lot of like voice chats all day. I'm really glad that there's a company policy to use push to talk voice.
Yeah.
Because like in a 13 person meeting and everyone is like, has a gaming, is sat at a gaming PC with a mechanical keyboard, it's actually a problem.
It's deafening,
like, there's like, it's always been a kind of like, well, the advantages are so great that no one would ever care that this is extremely loud. Anyone who says that has never been in that situation or indeed worked in the PC Gamer office and listened to Andy Kelly write a feature.
And the quite horrifying truth is that the non-mechanical versions are completely fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Honestly. Unless you're like gaming at such a high level, I don't think there's really much of it.
Yeah.
But they feel nice, but that's it.
Yeah, like I'm shopping for a work laptop at the moment, and the fact that you get a keyboard that it doesn't make sound is like an illicit thrill. It's incredible. And the whole thing looks like it's for a grown up.
I was playing Hades, last night, which I'm really enjoying at the moment. It's just been updated with like, they've added chaos.
Thingies thing. You know what I mean?
Supergiants?
Supergiants.
Yeah,
Yes.
Supergiants, third person, sort of top down, hack and slash, roguelike. And they added, like the god of chaos. And sometimes you go down into a hole and the god of chaos is there and she has new special boons that hurt you for 3 rooms but then give you a benefit at the end. And there's some cool kind of risk reward stuff they're playing with. I'm really looking forward to seeing how that game shapes up because it reminds me a bit of Dead Cells in that I really didn't get along with Dead Cells kind of whole sort of structure. It's quite an unusual structure until much later into its development when it had just been tuned just right. And also once I got a few key upgrades, suddenly it unlocked the rest of the game for me. And Hades feels like it could end up being that sort of thing where it's initially quite punishing and maybe a little bit boring, but then you start to see how you can tailor builds in a way that you don't realize when you first start playing it. So now you can give gifts to gods that will encourage them to show up more often. So you can tailor a build around a specific god that will come and give you a specific buff. So if you give Zeus a gift, he's more likely to turn up on your playthrough and give you the cool badass kind of electric shield throw that you want.
Right.
So they're playing with some interesting systemic things in that game.
I give all my gifts to the Brooklyn skeleton you beat up in the training room. Like,
why?
There's the training dummy essentially, but it's a skeleton and he speaks with a kind of Brooklyn accent, to my ear at least. And yeah, it's, what is it, like elixir or something, or some kind of, like a bottle of something you give to people and then they give you their sort of special thing in return.
Yeah, you give them, a sort of like hip flask of ambrosia. And
that's it, ambrosia.
Just a big old mug custard.
Yeah. And, his thing is actually quite good. It's saves you from death, and brings you back to like 10% health or something like that.
Yeah, it's like a tooth or something, isn't it?
Yeah. And also, he's very grateful. They've obviously taken great pains with the writing to make sure it's not weird that you beat him up on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Like the way your character plays it is like, are you sure you can hit me back and stuff like that? And he's like, no, never.
I gave, when I first started playing, I gave all of my gifts to Cerberus. So I just love the way they've drawn Cerberus. He's just a big red dog with green noses, in fact. And, it's worth giving everyone one gift because they immediately reciprocate for the first gift you give them. But I didn't realize this at the time, so I was just love bombing Cerberus. And yeah, he gives you a spiked collar that makes you harder to kill, which is great. And you can level up the items as well. Anyway, I'm just talking about Hades now. But yes, I sort of caught myself listening to myself playing it, and it was just horrendous noise. It's just the loudest thing. I was like, oh, yeah, it's a shame for the person who lives with me. Sorry, Emma.
We should probably just move on to talking about what we've been playing then,
good.
I suppose. Tom, I know you've been playing a lot of smaller games.
Yeah, well, the games themselves aren't necessarily small. I just played a small amount of them.
Oh, I see. I misunderstood.
So I just tried Forgotten Anne recently because it was a game that was really acclaimed at the time, but kind of passed me by. And it's really, interesting visually. It's, feels very much like a Ghibli movie. And it's about the land where lost things go, basically. But it has like some Ghibli movies, it's not as kind of cozy and cheerful as that sounds. There's something kind of sinister about the whole place. And you are, it's a bit of, I mean, it's good that it's called Forgotten Anne because you kind of know you're going to be playing someone called Anne. And, I think I'd seen some art from it, so I knew you played as a woman. But if you didn't know that, the whole intro really feels like it's leading up to you playing a sock for the whole game. It would be a brutal disappointment if you really bought into that, because sadly you don't. He plays Anne, who is an enforcer in the world of the Forgotten Things, where she gets to like just fucking vape people for not being
What?
Well, it's hard to explain, but it involves sucking them into some kind of vapor, basically.
You meant actually vape them.
Yeah.
You vaporize,
I
yeah.
thought you were showing, like, oh wow.
You don't inhale them yourself.
In the words of Bill Clinton.
And they're all, most of the people you encounter are things, if that makes any sense. So like your best friend's a lampshade. And it's not clear to me. I suppose it's just like the people there are people who've been forgotten and the things there are things that have been forgotten. But there's very little distinction between them beyond that.
So her role, as I understand it, because I know a little bit about it, her role is like, she's like a Blade Runner for escaped lamps, right? That's how I understand it.
Yeah, I think her job is more pedestrian than that usually, but there's been a fucking terrorist attack on the local, like, plant. I don't know what the plant does, but,
is it a plant
rebel forgotten scarves and socks have blown it up, causing massive damage and, possibly casualties. And now you're hunting them down.
Is this game real?
It's strange.
Yeah.
It's very charming. The art style is so nice and, like I said, it has that Ghibli feel, which is, you know, really saying something because not many games have that kind of charm. But it is a platformer at heart, and part of the nice kind of, I'm watching a nice animated movie feeling comes from the fact that, your character doesn't ice skate around when you're moving. So, you know, usually because there aren't, like with hand-drawn animation, you often don't have like 60 frames per second. The thing is animated at like 15 or 20 frames a second but the character still moves smoothly with the frame rate of the game. And that essentially causes a little bit of ice skating. And they don't have that, which is nice aesthetically. But you still aren't, you know, animated very smoothly. And that means that you just sort of, there's ambiguity about exactly where you're standing and have you reached the edge of the platform yet? And if you haven't, you shouldn't press jump. And if you have, you should. And if you misjudge it, you go too far and you don't press jump and you fall off. So it's like, it hurts it as a platformer, and I'm not a huge platformer person anyway. And so if your platforming isn't like movement and the basics and nuts and bolts of platforming has to be incredibly slick for me to give a shit at all. And so I played it right up until the first jump that I had trouble making, and then I was like, okay, I think I'm done. I think I'm going to look up like a no commentary let's play of it, because I actually really want to see where it goes story wise and just kind of soak up the atmosphere and the visuals and find out about these sock terrorists.
Take a deep breath of that atmosphere.
Yeah. Let's really inhale the lost socks. Yeah, so it's kind of a shame that I wish games were either easy or all had like a super easy mode, like just like the Mass Effect story mode, just like don't even think about challenge, just trivial, just get me through it because I want to see where it goes.
Sock facts only, please.
Yes. And I also played, I'm afraid I played like all the things that I played a little bit of. The reason I played a little bit of them is because I eventually hit a point where I didn't want to continue. So this might end up being a little bit negative. But actually, Wonder Song is, completely charming game. And I didn't stop because I didn't like it. I just kind of stopped at some point and haven't got around to getting back to it. But it's, extremely colorful, side-on game where you're a guy who sings and you solve all your problems by singing. And the singing interface is like, colors appear in a circle around you, and I'm playing on gamepad, so you push a thumbstick in the direction of the color that corresponds to the note you're going to sing. And, the puzzles are, generally pretty simple in that like, that it'll just come across like a ghost that is, they can't talk to you normally, but they can sing like, and as they sing, you both hear the note, but you also see it's red, blue, yellow, or if you're colorblind, you could see that it's upper right, lower left, straight left. So you have lots of information to go on, and all you got to do is repeat it back to them, and that like frees the ghost, and that's what the early puzzles are about. And it's kind of one of the reasons it's so charming is that your role in this village and how other people see you is very informed by the fact you're the guy who just sings at everything. They find it like slightly annoying, but like not, they're still kind of friendly to you. And they have to explain to you that not all of their problems can be solved by singing, but actually it turns out quite a lot of them can. And I got to later on, I don't know how complex it gets, but, I got to a part where like you stand on platforms that as you sing, the tone of your singing directs them in space. So it kind of like they're kind of growing on stalks and the stalks grow in the direction of your song kind of thing. Because like I say, the notes are on a circular radial menu around you. So you're actually kind of choosing a direction as you sing. And also just like the singing, this kind of sound effect for it is, just, gloriously like hammy, kind of like operatic kind of thing. Like he's really giving it his all at all times. Yeah, so it's really nice, but I haven't got that far with it. And I also played a little bit of Thimbleweed Park for the first time. I played it on the iPad because I saw it was on there. And I'm afraid it didn't work for me at all.
I can imagine those kinds of point-and-click adventures not being...
Well, actually, I like the interface for like pointing and clicking on things, but it just lives or dies by its humor, and I didn't find it funny. Like, one of the early characters you meet is just like his joke, and he only has one joke, and it's repeated many, many times, that he just adds Areno onto the end of things.
That's what to it?
Areno to the end of things. So I'm the Sheriff Areno. I see you've got a corpse Areno there. Let's go to the morgue Areno.
He doesn't add a Christian mode to the end.
That would be weird.
Because I heard Arena.
Just every time you're talking about Elder Scrolls, you keep saying Elder Scrolls Arena?
Yeah, no.
No, Oblivion. And like that's one of the linguistic quirks of Ned Flanders, and it's one of his least interesting and funny parts of a character from The Simpsons, which is not necessarily the highest bar of humor. So it just feels like, fell very flat for me. And it really doubles down on its jokes. Like it's not a game where like, if your jokes don't work for you, at least it's an interesting mystery. It's like the jokes, they ram them home. There's one early on that actually was a half decent joke until they repeated it like 5 times just to make sure you heard the joke.
Right.
Oh God. So those are my small experiences, not necessarily small games.
What have you been up to, Tom S?
I've been playing the very current video game Resident Evil 2.
Well, it is a very current video game.
Resident Evil.
It's getting all of everyone's big 5-star big numbers.
People love the remake.
Okay, that answers my question. I was going to say, can you explain how this is only number 2 when there have been many, and why is it new, and what's like compared to say Hitman 2, where if you ask me what's going on with Hitman 2,
yes,
it would take me 15 minutes to explain why Hitman 2 is called Hitman 2. But
yes, this is a remake, and not a remaster, a proper kind of from the ground up, properly rebuilt version of Resident Evil 2, which was a game with pre-rendered backgrounds, set camera angles as a result, and it's kind of a survival horror where you have to hoard ammunition and gradually make your way out of a mansion in a town that's been beset by zombies. But the interesting thing about Resident Evil is that it's changed genre and almost changed so much and evolved successfully with the years. Resident Evil 4 turned it into a close, claustrophobic, over-the-shoulder third-person shooter. Basically, it was an action game more than anything. And it was tense, and they still had some of that kind of ammunition management and difficulty, but it was also a great action game, it's right. And then the series kind of coasted on that for a bit up until 6, and it was increasingly bad. And then Resident Evil 7 came out with like a really advanced engine, and it went back to kind of like a much kind of more directed horror experience where you're in a house and it's bad and there's a man with a chainsaw, and it was much more kind of traditional horror movie fare. What Resident Evil 2 Remake does is it takes the Resident Evil 7 engine and creates a Resident Evil 4 game that is actually a remake of Resident Evil 2.
Right. Damn. I know exactly what you mean though, and that sounds amazing.
Yeah, and it is actually kind of amazing. Yeah, that's, especially if you've enjoyed the series from the start and enjoyed how it's evolved over the years, this is kind of like an all-in-one package that also has that kind of nostalgic value to it. And yet, the things they've changed and the way they've built the environment makes just enough concessions to modern gaming that it's not too frustrating or irritating, which is what the old games are now. Instead of inventory Tetris, which is the classic thing of, this shotgun takes up 6 blocks, so you have to kind of rotate it and slot it in here. And, now it's just, you just have a set number of slots in your inventory and you pick up pouches that increases the amount of things in your inventory. It's very satisfying kind of Metroidvania style, appeal to exploring these quite small spaces. Actually, they're all just a house, a big house, a big police station, but still manageably a house with like 3 floors and a set number of rooms, enough for you to really get your head around it and to run through those environments again and learn it properly. And of course, as you find gemstones and key cards, which is
bits of a statue.
Yeah, bits of statue, that literally still in there. And plug them into the right places, you unlock new stuff and you get like a shotgun, you get a pouch and you get that kind of lovely serotonin hit of, being like, that inconvenience is slightly less inconvenient now, which is never is not my favourite school of game design, that whole like creating loads of inconveniences for the player and then using your upgrades to remove them. But actually, like, the balance and pace of this is pretty much bang on, I'd say. Like, it's really satisfying and nice to play. Looks gorgeous as well. Like, the RE7 engine is super good at lighting, and so it's able to inject a lot of kind of mystique and detail into these very small environments. So a corridor can look amazing, and the zombies themselves are kind of rightly an ever-present threat. They're very, very hard to properly, fully stop. There's kind of a heavy randomization element where the headshots will actually blow their heads up and stop them. So you find yourself having this strange kind of relationship with individual zombies in particular corridors, where it's like, this is the one where I shot the legs off the guy. So look to the floor in this bit because his legs are gone, but he's still alive. He'll still come after me, but in a particular way.
Right,
and
cool.
there's sort of video like on Twitter of someone who shot both legs and both arms off a zombie, which takes a lot of ammo, and you want to preserve ammo in this game. So they really went after that particular zombie in that particular part of the mansion. And it was just kind of like wiggling like a snake towards him. And it was horrifying, really scary stuff. But I love that they're supposed to be this ever-present thing. You're not supposed to just be able to walk through a corridor and be safe in Resident Evil. That's what the safe rooms are for. And it captures that really well. So I'm just about 3 hours into it. And Andy Kelly has reviewed it and loved it. Gave it a big score. And I really agree with him because it's, in the PC Gamer style score guide, like, if you're going into the 90s, there's a clause like, it's got to kind of move gaming forwards in some way. There's got to be something really new here or exciting. And none of it is that. But as a kind of, a collection of the best bits of all the design that's gone into that series over a period of 15 years, it's a super well judged and well made and satisfying thing to play. And I'd recommend it to horror fans as well as Resident Evil fans. But if you're a Resi fan, it has that extra nice kind of flavour to it, that extra nostalgia, and it's clever. It's really nice.
Sounds rad.
Yeah.
I think people underestimate as well, like, well, that's nothing they do, but like, Resi 4 is so instrumental in like determining the vocabulary of like so many subsequent action games.
That's true.
Like, New Tomb Raider owes so much to Resident Evil 4. Like, the only thing maybe that would even share that debt is Gears of War. Like, those two games feel like they came along a few years apart, but not very far apart, and sort of like quietly determined how non-first person action games were going to work for like the subsequent like 12 to 15 years, which is completely nuts. And
absolutely. Yeah, so many games from like, the Division through to like the use of a narrow-ish kind of camera, field of view. Yeah. With, and the requirement that you aim and have to shrink that field of view and shrink your peripheral vision has become just a widely used industry standard. And Resident Evil 4 is one of the first games to really make use of that. Slow turning circles like Dead Space. I mean, there are so many games that owe that game a debt.
Something I'd be curious about in adapting that to Resi 2 is a thing that I probably didn't pin down at the time, but I like about the older Resi games, which were very much like pass the pad, almost collaborative experiences when I was a kid, right? Like, those are some of the earliest PlayStation 1 games I played, and that was because you'd sit with a friend and try and figure it out. And actually, structurally, despite the violence and the horror element and the survival element, they have quite a lot in common with point and click adventures. Like, they're very much screen based. It's very much about what can I find and do on this screen that I can take to this other screen and apply to this area to progress, right? Like, even the logic of a Resi puzzle is far closer to Monkey Island than to Doom.
Yeah, sure.
Despite them both being experiences where you find keycards. And And there's something about that quality that means that like those environments become those screens in Resi 1 and Resi 2 and like Code Veronica and Resi 3, I think. Yeah, like all have like they all gain like you sort of come to know them really well, and they have like a really specific like I haven't seen much of the remake, but there are going to be screens, I think, from the early part of Resi 2 that I know so well.
Yes.
They're like ingrained in my mind and they provoke a particular atmosphere the moment you see them again. I guess long-winded question, but the question is that sort of almost that nostalgia or that sense of attachment to a very particular environment retained when you go to a third person over the shoulder
absolutely.
retelling?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the things they've done really well. They've remixed and added rooms and stuff, but they've kept elements and kept specific visual elements, like the lobby of the police station. And the screen aspect you mention is, so doors are a really big deal in this game. Like, so
yeah,
it's hard for zombies to come through doors. If they're motivated enough, they'll do it. If you shoot their arms off, they can't. But doors are a big barrier that kind of, you can find safety by quickly running through a door, and suddenly a period of quiet resumes, and then you're back in the exploration space. And there will be dormant zombies around. They might not be dead. They might come back to life. They might grab your feet, or they might get up all of a sudden with sound cues. But basically, you get that feeling of tension and then suddenly having to escape and then being in a safe place and being able to explore it again. And the way the game is structured means you have to go through environments several times often, in like increasingly complicated loops, unlocking new things and stuff like that. So you really do get to know the environment. The only things they've really changed are in the map. Rooms, I really like this. Rooms are coloured red if you haven't found everything in the room.
That's good.
Which I found brilliant because, first of all, it doesn't have object glint in the way that the old games had to have in order to attract your attention in a low res, pre-rendered background to items that you need. So it would look absurd in a game with this kind of level of visual fidelity and realism to have objects glinting like that.
Stapler.
Wow, what a shiny key card over there that I can see from literally space because it's a fucking laser beam coming out of it. And so yeah, so they get around that by saying, well, this is red, you haven't looked at everything yet. But also, if you think you have, you think, well, there's a secret there. There are safes everywhere with little codes, and you just know that somewhere, if I look hard enough, I might find that. And a lot of that stuff's optional. Like a lot of it just has good, cool, like extra ammo, which is vital, pouches and stuff like that. And there's a brilliant room, which is just like a weapons room, and it's a series of lockers. You need a key card next to them all, and you need to enter the right code for each locker to open it individually. But there are 2 keys on the key card missing. And somewhere in this mansion, somewhere in this police station, those things are lurking. And I found one of them. I don't know where the other one is. And yeah, it's just really, it's kind of addictive. It's really kind of, it just really draws you into the whole item gathering and item kind of utility stuff.
How does the story stuff hold up? Because that is a series renowned for its ham.
I think it's still super ham, but it's like, there's a B-movie kind of fun to the Resident Evil series when it's going right, when it's doing its thing right. And I think it has captured that. I'm not far enough into it to really see how the story holds up. That like the Resident Evil series, a bit like Tomb Raider, a bit like too many series that have gone on for perhaps a few too many entries, just to kind of can implode under the weight of its own lore and characters and T-viruses and Z-viruses and Wesker and his various monstrous forms. And like, so far it's quite stripped back, and because it's just the second game remade, it's just a couple of characters in it. And that is a spooky place. That's what Resident Evil should be about, really. That's what Resident Evil 7 was about as well.
It's interesting that they went back to remake 2 rather than 1.
Yes.
Although, I mean, there is a remake of 1, which is 0.
It's basically a remaster. So they just,
but that was a remaster.
Yeah.
Right.
So that was very much like, well, we're not going to change the design much at all. We're just going to refresh all the visuals. Whereas this is a proper, well, let's sort of try and fuse all these areas into one game. And they've done it. The fact they've done it successfully is super satisfying. It's very good.
Awesome. It's good to know. That's actually jumped up my list now. I have to play that.
Lovely.
So I've been playing, I just started playing today because it came out, came out yesterday as you're listening to this, but today as we're recording this, Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2. Which is a, Warhammer 40,000 space strategy game. Mostly real-time battles, but with a grand strategy element. But, the best way to visualize it, I think, would be to imagine a scenario in which Cologne Cathedral had a passionate and very physical love affair with a tugboat. And then the very angry offspring of this union, decided to do cool drifts on an icy car park in order to assert dominance over each other. It is essentially a game of, positioning and timing and strategy, on a 2D plane, starring the Warhammer 40,000 universe most overblown starship designs.
Yes.
And I played the prologue campaign, which isn't especially long and is very much a tutorial. And the first mission and a bit of, the first campaign. There's several campaigns, there's different races. So the first part of the Imperial campaign. And I'm really, really enjoying it so far. You've played a little bit as well, Tom, haven't you?
Yeah, I played played the prologue, and I've played a bit of the Tyranid campaign. And the prologue is hilariously good.
It's so good. I don't know to start with this. So I want to dig into why I like it a lot as a game. But one thing that's really struck out at me about it, and I don't know if it's a change in policy or something like that, but there are a lot of Warhammer games. There are a tremendous amount of War games. Most of them are Warhammer 40,000 games. It doesn't feel like it's that much time on the pod between a Warhammer game coming up, whether that's Mechanicus recently or Gladius or, Vermintide or any number of the other ones.
Yeah.
But for the most part, the games, like a lot of licensed Warhammer materials, steer really quite clear of whatever the main story of the current generation of miniatures and tabletop games and books is. So the Dawn of War series, which tells a long story of its own, tells that story in a pocket of the universe that feels like it kind of owns. And even though, like, the Space Marines that star in the Dawn of War series are considered to be canon, those characters never show up anywhere else. And it feels like they belong to Relic, and Relic just put them in a box. Like, and at other times, usually they'll just, like, invent a new planet for the game to take place on. And, it never really feels like, I always assumed that a licensee for Games Workshop doesn't get to play with the big toys when it comes to characters and situations and things.
Yeah.
And then Battlefield Gothic 2, and even Battlefield Gothic 1.
The first one did as well, yeah.
Interacted with it a bit, but even then felt like very much its own thing, right? Like off in its own pocket of the universe.
And also that came out like quite close to when 8th edition, the latest edition of Warhammer 40,000 came out as well. So maybe they didn't have quite the same chance to incorporate it all. But now, yeah.
Whereas this is actually I would love to see what someone who didn't love this fiction already made of that beginning, because the prologue is essentially you playing through various perspectives on an event that is huge in the modern Warhammer 40,000 fiction. It actually happened as part of like a live event, the equivalent of a live event in a tabletop game where the story is told over successive supplements basically and sort of unfolds.
Yeah.
That led to the launch of the 8th edition of the tabletop game and the timeline skipping ahead a bit and all of this stuff. Those events are fully realized in the start of Battlefleet Gothic through a mixture of in-game stuff and painted cutscenes that like bring that stuff to life. And it is very silly, but I love it. Bring that stuff to life in a way that I don't think I've seen like anywhere else. Like it's partly like the best Warhammer 40k cartoon I've watched. Yeah. Which is kind of nuts. I just really wasn't expecting that. Like, I was expecting to like it because I like the fiction, but seeing like, those events and then I realized I had like the proper nerd goosebumps for like the first half of it because, and I think I get to the mission that we're probably going to talk about from the prologue, but, the prologue, this will mean something to the Warhammer nerds, surrounds the fall of Cadia, which is an event that happened in the fiction like 2 years ago in real life. So within the span of development of this game, and it kind of brings it to life. And I think one of the reasons they might have been able to do this is because the tabletop game has never spent a lot of time thinking about the space stuff. Like the story, it features a lot in the stories. Yeah. And specific things that happen in space matter. But for the most part, for obvious reasons, there hasn't been a Battlefield Gothic tabletop game in decades. The action's confined to the ground. So in making a space game, they have the freedom to like refer to things that are happening in the ground but tell their own space business. And it's really gratifying. Like just having like an offhand comment from a character that kind of refers to something that's happening on the ground and so on. And, one mission in the prologue, maybe mine is spoiler, but has you wait for reinforcements. And knowing what that story was and knowing what those reinforcements were likely to be was like a genuine, like, I wonder if they're going to do this. I wonder if they're going to do this. And essentially it's, are they about to put me in charge of a a flying battle monastery the size of like a little moon? And the answer is yes. And are they going to ask me to crash this into like an ancient alien space gun that happens to look like the Chaos logo, but that's a coincidence?
Yeah, it's hard to, I don't know how to like get across the absurd scale of the two things in that fight. And there's, so it's like, it's the equivalent of, so you got all your units in Red Alert and they're running around and they're the size they are. You've got your big tanks and then something turns up that's the size of your base. That's what it's like. It's like, oh, it's a floating base that's made of cathedrals and lasers.
Yeah, exactly.
And now you get
it's
to control
very
this
angry.
thing. And it's extremely angry. And, it turns up and all the Chaos ships start moving towards it. And then they suddenly like, they're not moving in to engage us, they're moving to charge us. So you get this absurd thing where this thing the size of your base is moving very slowly towards the other big thing on the map. And all the Chaos ships just, it's a kind of spoilery, I guess, but they're plunging into it and exploding. And I was actually like laughing out loud.
Me too. It's so good, particularly because, you can give like the all ahead full order to the flying monastery, at which point the giant engines on the back of it like flare to life. Because the Space Marine in charge basically says like, fuck it. Like, all ahead full. And you just, it's like, that universe is deeply silly in a lot of ways, but there's something so specific about its aesthetic. Like, it is strange to me that it's like, the way it very early in the Imperial campaign, in game terms, the Imperium is divided into three factions. The Imperial Navy, the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, and the Adeptus Mechanicus, the nerds.
Yeah.
And that is literally what they break down into.
Yeah.
It's like, you've got kind of like the preppy naval officer, and like, there's lots of different characters, but they're all basically the same, which is like preppy naval officer, jock Space Marine, and the dork who's covered in dendrites, and like, speaks like this a bit for the glory of Mars. And like, and it's so good for some reason, like this sort of like high gothic camp. And seeing it all to come together, like, particularly given how intimately tied to what feels like the live story of that universe, is like genuinely like a huge guilty pleasure. Particularly because, it does things like, it's also far more like, cosmopolitan in how much of that universe it brings together than like a Launch Dawn, a war game, for example.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you play as every faction in the campaigns necessarily, but, you know, I loaded up the multiplayer menu just to look, and it's like,
it's huge, right?
It's huge. And like, within every faction is dozens of sub-factions. And so the fact that like, you know, you can pull up, you know, the Adeptus Mechanicus and then pick which Forge world you want your fleet to be from, and it changes their, you know, coloring and sort of, you know, aesthetic appropriately, and do that for Eldar, you know, Necrons, Space Marines is like a genuine, regardless of the game itself, like that just is like a big old fan servicey treat.
Super
really
good.
Like it.
They've redone the way campaigns work now, so they're almost like a sort of mini 4X campaigns where you've got like nodes that you capture, and it's not too complicated, which is good. But there's a little bit of resource management, there's a little bit of kind of fleet management. And I'd really like that as well, and I'd love to see them almost like incorporate the factions that have started the campaign in the first game into the second. So you've got three campaigns. You've got, in addition to the prologue, you've got the Imperium, you've got Necrons, and you've got the Tyranids. And they all seem like quite lengthy campaigns when you've played them throughout. And it feels hopefully as though you'll meet a lot of the factions like the Orcs and the Eldar that you don't necessarily get to play as in the campains as part of that. But I'd like to see them kind of just expand it and bring all of that into
me too. I mean, like, I really like that they, you know, for example, have decided to bring out, cause it's not the obvious three. Like, I feel like Imperium are going to be in everything.
Yeah.
But, you know, there have been a lot of 40k games now that focus on like Eldar and Orcs, for example, because they're probably the more recognizable. So getting like, I mean, I like Necrons, so I'm very happy to see Necrons done right. Particularly because if you haven't been into Warhammer for a long time and you remember Necrons is basically just space undead, which is what they functionally are. The fact that they made them sassy a couple of years ago, now they're really sassy.
They lean into that pretty hard as well.
They do. And that's why it's so cool is that, you know, it's not just any, you know, Necron that features in the campaign quite heavily. It's Trazyn the Infinite who collects people, freezes them in time, and then throws them like Pokemon to solve problems, which is the best thing to do if you're a floating robot skeleton wizard. the thing I think about it though, and having come out of that prologue, I gestured to this, but like, I have no idea what that series of events would mean to you if you weren't familiar with them already. That's my only, I mean, I'd like to, if you have played it and you don't know what the fuck is going on and you enjoyed it anyway, I'd like to, or if you didn't, I'd like to actually know what people made of it. Because like, it is, I think a little bit too guilty of being like enjoying what it's winking at. And when you know that story and you know why it's significant, that like, there's a cutscene early on where like a guy is, it looks like the planet's in peril. And then a little Adeptus Mechanicus nerd man in his little hat is like going like, shunting augmented power. The augmented power is here, I think, or something. And then it zooms out to reveal that scatter beetles are helping him. And a skeleton is looking in from the side of the room like, what does that mean? And then a big force field appears and the planet is okay. And I know exactly what that means, but I would forgive anybody for having no fucking idea what is going on. And it doesn't explain any of it at all, to the point that it almost relies on you having read either a wiki page, which is more likely, or
several
like
books.
Several books worth of 40k back matter. So
that's true.
That's just story stuff, but I don't know. I guess maybe if you just enjoy the bizarre, the richness of it, like the kind of exuberance of it, then there's something there. But
it's likely absurd. I think the skybox is a weird term for
it's
space.
Big space objects in
big space objects in space.
Box.
And one of them is just, some of the more epic scenes, the skybox is just full of ships. And it's actually like, it's not a big budget game. You feel as though,
it's a manageable budget game.
It's a manageable budget game. Yeah. So you kind of feel its limitations as you're watching it, but the kind of, that they've attempted it so earnestly and, helps me to buy into it and be like, it is big.
I think there's something to be said for like, whenever you see something it matters when something specifically is rendered. Like, they have they actually show the warp, which is cool. Like, you see, if you're not familiar with Warhammer 40,000, the equivalent of hyperspace is basically you go into hell and then you come back out of hell wherever you want your spaceship to go. And I can't really think of a 40k game that does anything other than show ships vanish into the warp and come back out of the warp again. And I know it's me talking about things exiting hyperspace, but but there's a great scene where you see a ship exit the warp from its perspective, exiting basically a purple demon realm full of huge grinning faces leering out of vast cosmic nebula. And then that rips away to plonk them in the middle of a huge space battle taking place between angry cathedrals. And it's like, this is great. Like, it's really good.
I see that and I got a massive kick out of it as a fan. And it also makes me think someone one day must sling a few $1 million at a film that will properly do this and go all in on it. And man, it might be bad.
It would be like,
I will watch the fuck out of it.
It would be it needs the Jupiter ascending treatment.
Get all in.
Yeah, and then he does stuff like, have you played any of the Imperium campaign?
I played, I think the first sort of hour of it.
Right. Cause quite early on, it starts actually using art from like classic Warhammer supplements. It uses art from like the really early Horus Heresy art and stuff, and does animatics based on it. It's like, oh man, it's great. Although it has been disconcerting to learn how loads of names are pronounced.
Oh no.
It's definitely Horus, which sounds a lot like Horus.
It's saying Horus.
Yeah.
Horus
Heresy. It's definitely
How could you, Horus?
It's the Space Wolf Primarch that I thought was Lehman Russ is apparently Lemon Roos.
Oh, come on.
No.
Which sounds like something you make on Bake Off.
Roos. Lemon.
It's Roos. They say Roos. It's really weird. It's really weird.
But you just know Games Workshop will have had the official stamp on that stuff. So.
Yeah, I know. It's probably right.
It's disturbing.
Based on what happens later in that story, no spoilers, I'm dreading what happens when Rabute Gilliman shows up.
Oh,
How the fuck do you say that? We'll find out.
Good point.
It's going to have more significant ramifications for Miniatures Monthly than it does for this podcast, but like.
Enjoy our segment on that.
Yeah.
Coming too soon.
Yeah. We should talk about what you actually do in the game, because I've talked about what it means in terms of pictures of spaceships, which I'm a fan of, but nonetheless.
Yeah.
How would you sign it up, Tom? I'd be curious to see your take on it as an RTS.
So there's no base building or anything like that. Basically, you tend to have like quite a small fleet of 3 or 4 ships, but it's about micromanaging the subsystems of those ships and their sub-abilities, to the extent that actually you can quite happily put a lot of your fleet on autopilot and have them just do the maneuvering in their own ranges themselves. And then basically just micromanage their sub abilities. So you can launch fighters and stuff. You can launch bombers, and you can launch various types of torpedo. You can, attack them with certain various types of lasers. If you're within range, you can launch boarding actions of various different kinds. And it's about intense micromanagement of very large, lumbering ships. Some escorts that help and do sort of like recon and scanning and debuffing and stuff like that. But for the most part, the decisive stuff is happening on your big capital ships. And yeah, the UI is terrifying for battles. But once you've kind of spent a couple of hours with it, it kind of starts to click into place.
I think it's pretty good actually because I mean, I think the thing that's scary about it at first is, so the game is, you're right, the game is split between, essentially what I would describe as sort of in the moment or reactive decisions. Like there's a lot of things that are like triggered abilities, like an RPG or an MMO or something. Like,
yes.
If you hover over the button to fire boarding torpedoes, which is the best idea. It's a torpedo full of man. You have two torpedoes, torpedo full of gun, torpedo full of man. If you fire a torpedo full of man, it goes sideways. It goes sideways. If it hit enemy ship, a fight takes place inside that ship you'll never see, and you find out how many of their people died and how much of a morale problem this was. How unhappy they are following the arrival of Torpedo Man and his friends. And when you hover over that, you can see the side arcs and you trigger it and you choose a target and so on. Yep. And then, you also have torpedo, of gun, which goes forwards. And when you hover over that, you'll see the forward trajectory because they'll fire out basically linearly. And they're essentially projectiles. They're almost like action game projectiles. There's no picking a target for that. You just launch them and they start going in that direction. And if you have positioned yourself cleverly and you know exactly where you are, hopefully you'll either block off an enemy's movement in a particular direction, forcing them to turn, or you will, hit them, which is good because they go bang. So that's the sort of, but that's only like some of the buttons on the screen. And the reason it's scary is there's fucking loads of them. But the thing that's cool about it is the rest of them are also like, there's like almost like different orders of how regularly you need them. Because then the opposite end of that is on the left-hand side of the screen, you're basically configuring the priorities for the AI for a given ship.
Yeah.
Because you are encouraged to use functionally the autopilot. And it's like setting up a Final Fantasy gambit on the fly. You basically say, engage at this range, with this facing, prioritize these guns. So you can just say like attack however you like at longest range, but you can also say only use your starboard. I want you to attack, but at medium range and only with your starboard guns. And then the AI will plot a course for itself that means that it sticks near the target.
Yeah.
Doing that. You can then on the fly change a ship to say, actually attack head on because you want to necessarily use the torpedoes in a bit. And so you set that up in advance and kind of keep it ticking over. And I really like that as sort of like on the fly, almost like programming the different ships. Yeah. Because you can leave them and they'll probably do something approximately right. But those buttons are just for optimizing the approach. And then you've got like some specific things, like you have a bar that you can burn to either like boost the engines or boost your turn rate, that kind of thing. So you can like temporarily go, and that adds this really cool, like sometimes almost like, action sort of based thing. Like if an enemy ship goes critical and is going to blow up, you see like a ring around it and that's the size of the eventual explosion. And then another ring starts to fill out from the ship. And when it reaches the edge, the whole thing blows up. So that's when you want to give emergency orders to your ship to like do a hard burn to turn and then a full engine burn to try and get out. And that creates these, in addition to like the planning element and the triggering damaging attacks and that kind of thing. In between, there's this element of like interesting like emergency maneuvers and things to avoid obstacles or get out of explosions, which feels like a very effective realization of that fantasy of, what's going on in a big starship during a space battle. And I think for me as well, that's what justifies it being a space battle on a 2D plane rather than like a homeworld style 3D thing. Cause I think with that degree of like 3 layers of complexity, it would just be overwhelming to then expand that out in 3D. Like it benefits from, you can pause and zoom in and out and get an absolute sense of where everyone is relative to each other because ultimately they're like pieces on a table. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it reminds me of how absurdly complex Homeworld is really because when you launch boarding parties and attack fighters and bombers, the tiny little craft, little flies buzzing around that have to go and buzz around other ships. In Homeworld, you have to micro those guys. And in this, you just press the button and press target and they'll just go off and do it and the bombers will come back and it's fine, basically. Like, you don't have to worry about it. It automates the right parts of the battle, it feels to me.
Yeah.
And actually leaves the actual decision making to you. There's some, the stuff I dislike is actually kind of like scenarios, things like that, like the capture point stuff doesn't quite make sense to me for that type of game. It's good. Maybe like capture points in themselves aren't bad, but it will have like 5 seemingly randomly placed like blobs and then your ships have to go and rush to them. I don't know, like that never feels quite right to me. Whereas the more structured missions in the story campaigns have felt a bit more satisfying. But I do really like the variety between the different fleets. Like what they're good at and bad at is really well defined. So the Tyranids are about getting really close and literally just eating ships. They're surrounded by all these kind of buzzing flies, which is kind of just a good job of implying that they're actually, millions of little smaller Tyranids just swarming around these bigger ships. And when they get close, the flies just go off and attack the enemy vessel. And it's like you're just kind of catching up with them as they're trying to turn away. And some of them have this disgusting move where they just throw out a horrible tube just latches on to the enemy and just starts sucking their morale out. And who knows what the hell is really going on there, like in terms of deck by deck. No one wants to know.
Morale as a kind of concept in this is very good.
Yeah.
It's just like, are the thousands of people that live inside the spaceship happy? The answer is probably not.
Very much.
But honestly, the longer the proboscis is there, the less happy we are.
Exactly.
Let
us say we hate that tube.
They can self-destruct into a cloud of spores that eat spaceships.
Oh no.
Which is very good.
Also OES.
They've done a good job of differentiating the factions. So the Imperial faction is a kind of good mid-ground between like artillery and firing. Chaos, like as in the tabletop game, they're very good at range. They've got really amazing artillery and long range, kind of crazy big shot stuff. And then Eldar are just very tricky and hard to kill and very fast. And Orcs, I feel have been a bit screwed over in this edition perhaps because they get eaten by Tyranids. Like the whole thing with Orcs is that they just charge in and smash stuff like at close range and the Tyranids just eat them. They just eat them. It's tragically true of the Wolf 140,000 in the universe as well, but
Well, those two are destined to kind of consume each other. Like
yeah, for sure, yeah. The Orcs at least will seem happy about it, like glorious death.
Yeah, I haven't really dug into the grand strategy layer much yet. But one thing about it that I didn't realize is that like, it's really not a series of, it's probably obvious, but it's not a structure. Once you get out of those tutorial missions, it's not really a series of structured battles. It's,
No.
It's matches, essentially. Like a Total War campaign or like a linked tabletop campaign. You say, I'm going to deploy this fleet here. It has this force composition, which is essentially its points value. And you take on whatever fleet is there. And if you defeat them according to several victory conditions, which are just sort of generated for you, then you take over that sector. It's not like an RTS campaign or something like that. And
no.
I actually quite like that. The thing I like about that is I feel like, I've only just started playing and I hope I'll stick with it and I definitely want to play more, but, it feels like more like an XCOM campaign or something where you can probably drop in and just play like a map. Do a round. And then drop out again. And talking about it being reasonably scoped, I think that's a really sensible decision if you are developing an RTS game for how to structure a campaign, because it allows you to focus on the fundamental systems of the game rather than having to design, let's say 25 hand-designed missions for the course of a scenario. And obviously if you are Blizzard, you can do both. But if you're sort of developing an RTS, then getting the fundamental battle game, like the matched play, I've used a Warhammer term, but like battle game down and just building a meta campaign around that gives those games a bit of context is a smart way of doing it to me.
Yeah, I'd much prefer that. Like it's the old, Dawn of War expansion, was it Dark Crusade?
Right, yeah.
And that is flaws, but I'd much rather that over a linear thing. Blizzard, I think.
That's way better.
StarCraft 2's campaigns always struck a really nice balance actually here, where they do have like, again, this is Blizzard cash helps and,
I was going to say, it's almost like they only get through it because of the sheer investment of time and money to get through it.
And it seems like super hard to design satisfying RTS missions. I can't think of many that, like a handful that are really sort of outstanding. I mean, there'll be a few like Warcraft 3, which I need to play. There's a couple of Company of Heroes ones I'd mention, but like actually really great handcrafted RTS missions, pretty hard to come by. So the idea of actually just making it more of a sandbox maybe it's just a smarter thing to do.
Yeah.
One of my favourites in RTS campaigns actually was in, not Dark Crusade, but the next one, the Sisters of Battle one.
Oh yeah.
Soulstorm.
Yeah.
And it's against the Sisters of Battle, and they have I don't know the Warhammer term for it, but an angel.
A living saint.
And the angel makes everything near it invincible. And you have like these 4 shrines you've got to destroy to win the mission. And whichever one you go to, they just show up with their angel, and now it's invincible and they're invincible. And so the only way to do it is to pretend you're going to attack one of them, but send your real force to the other one, and wait for your like mock force to arrive and lure the angel there, and then immediately strike on the other one. And I did that, and I was like, wow, I just used a tactic in an RTS game. And this is like, that's one now. That's a track record of life history of using tactics in RTS games. I've used one tactic, and that was it.
Right, rather than build many things.
Yeah, I mean, unit compositions, I had to do that. Like, I will use it, we'll make this to counter that. But actually, like, this is distraction and deception and, what's the word?
Yeah, right. Strategy.
Misdirection.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I'd like to play more. I haven't really gotten deep enough in it to get to that stuff, but
yeah,
so
I need to
far.
play more as well. Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I hope it brings the other factions in. And it looks as though, you're a kind of ticker where for every sector you capture, there's almost like flashpoints that are going to happen that might be designed missions. And
it's also possible to fail the campaign.
Yeah.
Which gives it a kind of XCOM-ish kind of thing.
It's quite
like
cool.
if your flagship is destroyed, you lose. And if like there's like a threat level equivalent, I can't remember exactly what it's called in this. But yeah, if the enemy gets too far ahead, it just comes to an end, which, we'll see. Like at the moment I'm playing it on easy, and that's without shame because I want to get through it and see all of it. So I'm not really like, if I get super into the strategy layer, maybe ramp up the difficulty, but yeah, so far I'm really, really into the spacemen.
It's good spacemen.
Surprising nobody.
It's good spacemen.
Shall we do some questions from questions?
Why not?
Okay. First question is an order of business type thing. Matt writes, Dear CNC, where is, he's shouting because it's capped, CNC D&D Part 2? And the answer for this is, it's coming, pretty much. So, for a bit of context, I had hoped that we would do this over Christmas, but I underestimated Christmas, but also kind of just how totally knackered. I particularly, I'll take responsibility for this. I was at the end of an extremely busy couple of months. So, decided to take it a little bit easier. I have written the scenario now, so it exists. Alex is joining us and has a character sheet, which is very exciting.
Wonderful.
It's in the works. I think we just need to sort of carve out a time to record it in a kind of fun and relaxed fashion. Like, I don't know if, I think we did say this, but the D&D, 8-hour D&D campaign we put out last year was all recorded in a single day.
Yeah. Hence a lot of the carnage.
Which is nuts, incidentally.
Yeah.
And I've done that twice in my life. I did it for the PlayStation Access Cyberpunk campaign as well. And 7 hours of that is a bit much. So I think the plan is we'll settle in, record it, put it all out at once probably, but I want to do it. I want to return to those characters
Really
and I have some fun ideas.
Yeah, me too.
Really it.
But yeah, apologies that it wasn't over Christmas as planned, but I needed to go asleep. And it did.
Will we bring back the amazing theme music?
In fact, we have a new edit. Thanks very much to music hero Mike Debenham. Slightly sped up. It's not tremendously different, but it is a little sharper, which is
Love it.
Always nice.
That's fantastic.
Is it like when you played Oblivion for the first time and it's like the Morrowind theme, but it has its own grandeur to it?
No, I mean, it is. I mean, it is the same, piece of music. It's just, I think it's better because there's a dirge quality to the first version. Although I am still that. I will say that music reveal is one of my favorite things ever in CNC. Like, because Mike just produced that music without me asking for it.
Right.
And, I knew I wanted it, but I was too nervous to ask like an actual talented musician to go away and do a fantasy remix of the CNC theme, which is obviously, from Clambake, by Campobo and the Bullion. It's a piece of music that already exists. So yeah, for that to exist was effing rad. I'm very much looking forward to, returning to those characters and what happens next once you do the thing that happens at the end of that campaign.
Come to terms with just the sheer atrocity really of it already.
I was thinking about I know what the title of the campaign is and it is a pun and, might put that out as a poster at some point, but only when we're committed to the recording process. And I'm not just putting a poster out for something that doesn't exist.
Good times.
The Moblin Gosh.
I'm not doing that joke again.
That's too hard on your voice last time, I meant.
I don't know if I won't give too much away, but I don't know if the people who liked the first one would forgive me for not forcing myself to do that voice again. What I'm saying is I don't want to do it for the back half of an 8-hour session.
Yes, you're right. It's reasonable.
Okay, that answers that. So, first question comes from Otto, who writes, "Hi, Crate and Crowbar. I was wondering, what's your outside food policy? I'm asking because I noticed some signs saying food needed to be purchased at the bar, and apparently your kitchen is closed for the time being. Also, do you serve any microbrews? Thanks, Otto." This is obviously inviting us to a sort of pub-based roleplay session. I think the thing we've established very, very clearly over the 5 plus almost 6 years we've been doing this is that we don't have any kind of food in this room. It's just drink. It's just drink.
And we're on wine tonight.
Yeah, we're on wine this evening if you're curious.
Quite a lot of wine.
Yeah, we're on bottle 3. We don't tend to be very much of a beer pod. Tom and I, you and I drink beer when we're doing Miniatures Monthly.
Yeah, that's true. I don't know why we do that instead of other stuff.
That's because that podcast is 8 years long.
Yeah,
if we drank
super long.
And if we drank liquor, it would be bad.
Also, I think it's like, because we played like 8 hours of Warhammer often beforehand, or 5 hours of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, something a bit,
it's the
easy
podcast.
Going is better.
Yeah, exactly. Next question comes from Simon, who writes, "If FPSs are rock, walking simulators are folk rock, management games are classical music, and MOBAs are discordant avant-garde samples of plate smashing, then what game genre is pop? And which is jazz?"
I would say like the Nuovo finalists in the IGF are jazz.
What was the Nuovo? Who was in the Nuovo finalists bracket this year?
That's a very good question I can't answer.
It's so I get what you're saying. So, you know, I think I can answer this. So I would say that pop games are like light but well-crafted puzzle games. Like a good match 3 or something that, you know, you can pick up
Candy
and
Crush
enjoy.
definitely feels
Yeah,
like
like
it's pop.
beautifully
Bubblegum
crafted.
pop is Candy Crush.
Beautifully crafted, you know, there's no discounting the skill that goes into making something, but very much adhering to patterns that the audience immediately understands.
Actually, I forgot this was a PC game. I could have talked about this. I played Candy Crush over the break. Did I say
Yeah,
that
we talked
already?
about that last
Okay,
episode.
shit. I was too drunk to remember.
That's a good pop game though.
Yeah, exactly. That's your pop, right?
Yeah.
Like you kind of know what
Peggle.
you're getting, but you're happy to receive it.
Yeah, right.
I think your jazz game is your sort of, like experimental, maybe free or pay what you want itch.io game, where it's about the mechanics they're not using, man.
Yeah.
But the problem with this is that games don't really have like an improvisational quality. It's
No,
something they struggle
no.
with, right? Like there's no, like we have game jams, but that is still about creating something with a fixed endpoint.
Yeah, the player rarely gets to do anything like that at all. Like the closest equivalent I can think of is certain combat systems like Devil May Cry, where they're only improvisational within a very tightly reined in rules.
But if you're, like, actually bizarrely, on the last episode, Tom, we did end up talking about the only way to get around Valve's anti-cheat to be a kind of jazz Counter-Strike player who behaves so erratically.
to get around a predictive AI.
Yeah, exactly. But I believe in that most cases, being like a jazz fighter wouldn't necessarily earn you the highest scores, because games still want you to adhere to a rhythm. Even Devil May Cry or something wants you to, you know, these games are about combos, not like, oh man, it's about the beats you don't hit in the combo, right? Like,
Yeah, that,
are games jazz proof? That's the thing I'm turning this question to.
I think they
kinda
might be.
I would say like sandbox games are pretty jazz. Because there's no like fixed metric you're trying to, you know, maximize or anything. Like even just Minecraft is just doing what you like and creating your own thing and finding your own groove.
The true sandbox.
I should mention jazz punk here just because it has the word jazz in the title. And then someone's going to at us or me if we don't. So.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I think sandbox games are a decent example. Like, Next comes from Engineera, who writes, with the critical buzz around more narrative-focused tactics games like Mutant Year Zero, do you think the next XCOM will put more focus on telling a story with characters instead of the customized squads? The narrative-heavy XCOM 2 Legacy DLC was very good.
I don't know, but
Because I don't work for Firaxis.
I don't want them to. Like, I don't think that would be better, really. I started to play Tactical Legacy or whatever it's called. And it wasn't a fault of this DLC, but I just remembered how much I hate the aggro mechanic in XCOM, just like this blundering into like, oh, I took one square too far, so now I aggroed them on the last guy's turn.
Yeah.
They all get a free turn on me, and now I'm fucked. And it's all down to that. Like, that's just all of your success and failure comes down to, did you move one square too far with this guy and the wrong, and you can avoid it, but only by doing the super cautious Overwatch thing, which, XCOM has been desperately trying to persuade you not to do. But yeah, it didn't feel like the template for like, here's what future XCOM games will be. And I don't know, that series is so, I think when they make it XCOM 3, every time they make a main XCOM game, they are going to have to say, it's always going to be seen as an answer to the question of like, what should XCOM be? And so they can't just take, a systems-y driven game and say, no, it's going to be story driven this time. It would just upset too many people. It wouldn't serve the purpose that they want to serve. The thing I'm really interested in is like, all the changes I want them to make are things they can't do because XCOM fans would be furious at them for it. And I suppose, like, the XCOM remake, was quite brave in terms of how much it did change from the original. And if they're willing to be that brave again, they could scrap a lot of, like, just that thing of like the meta game, the base building stuff has a secret best thing to do. And if you don't do it, you're fucked, and you won't find out you're fucked till 17 hours in. Right. Like that kind of thing. I just want to see that die. And I don't know if they can do that whilst keeping XCOM fans happy.
I just want them to add kissing. Like, that's the narrative depth I would like them to add. Like, that's all anyone wants, right? You want the relationships between the soldiers to blossom into love. Yeah. So that they can die tragically on the battlefield.
Well, the Chosen started to take some steps in that direction with like soldier mons and stuff. Yeah. And they can clearly go so much further with that. And
exactly.
Really good.
I mean, it's the moment it comes to like, I respect you professionally. And what I think it needs is a sort of procedural cop show style, when are they gonna finally do it sort of tension. You know what I mean?
Actually, there's something kind of cool that I hadn't thought about myself so much in playing, but everyone has they have a natural like compatibility rating. And that does not limit their bond rating, but it affects how fast their bond levels up. And I just saw a tweet from someone saying like, oh, you think just because these two main plot characters have a 5% compatibility rating that I'm not going to ship them? Well, I'm just going to put them on every fucking mission together until they goddamn get it together.
Yeah, I mean, that is a time-honored dramatic impetus. And I think more games need to accept that, that is the fuel that fires a dozen, like, American TV shows of all kinds of crime types.
It's Fire Emblem. More people should steal mechanics wholesale from Fire Emblem.
I mean, Fire Emblem has like the fact that all the characters are pre-designed.
That's
right?
true. But there are so many of them.
There are so many of them that it's almost like the procedural.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. I mean, I think I said after I reviewed Battletech, that the only thing I really wanted for that game to have is like, shipboard, romance between missions, people getting in tiffs, thing of the week. Because those procedural strategy games are functionally sort of procedurally in the TV sense, in that it's like mission of the day type plus. And what they need to add is the thing that you do if you're writing a murder mystery show or something, which is also add the personal character drama of the day that runs alongside the mission, is maybe informed by it. That is the dimension that they're missing. The level is like, this person's trying to figure out how they feel about the fact that this person wants kids and they don't. But also, it's a hot drop onto Stygies 5.
But then, I don't understand why we don't see more of this sort of thing in games, because so many articles have been written about Mass Effect and, BioWare relationship stuff about the characters there and what that says about them and what choices people made about who the relationships they chose to pursue. And that ran alongside a nerdy as fuck sci-fi epic. And why can't we have more of both of that?
I think
maybe it's just hard to write. Right?
Asking for a friend, who is me, do you think that kind of romance stuff, for the player to be engaged with that, do they have to be playing a single character that they've like customized and who is them?
No, The Sims proves otherwise. Like, people want to bash their action figures together in a sexy way. You know what I mean?
Good. I'll tell my wizards.
Make the wizards kiss. It's broadcast now. It's online.
Because it also answers the XCOM side of things
smooch
as well.
Wizards.
Like if you want to romance in XCOM, are people going to care about it enough? And like in XCOM, probably yes, because you're super invested in your characters because you know they could die at any time. But if you have like a limited number of plot characters, but you're not specifically playing as any given one of them, they're just a cast of characters.
I think games have traditionally been like, I think there's so many games recently. I wrote about this recently for some of the last stuff I did for PC Gamer, but like there are so many games recently that prove that as soon as you open up whatever sort of like the world of the game is to different types of experience, you start getting fan bases you don't expect.
Yeah.
You know, there are a couple of examples that you could use for this, but one of the ones I always think about is Dishonored, which is definitely like a, you know, post Ion Storm immersive sim with the bearing up the legacy of, Thief and Deus Ex and Hitman. But because its art style was more robust and original, and because it showcased different kinds of characters, it suddenly gained this huge and very devoted fandom around its fiction that engaged with it in a very different but no less valid way. And the reason you don't have that kind of fandom springing up around Deus Ex is because Deus Ex is aesthetically super boring. Like, it's really generic cyberpunk. It's an amazing game, but it's extremely inflexible, very derivative cyberpunk. And, you know, because Dishonored was aesthetically kind of far braver and more interesting, you gain all these other fans and you diversify your fan base. And in diversifying the fan base, you diversify the people who want to make games and things. And it's basically just only good. And that is, thank you for coming to my TED talk about why XCOM needs shagging. Like,
there is a really big challenge that comes with this sort of thing where I've been playing, strategy series I can't talk about just yet, but it runs into this problem where you can actually simulate a lot of this stuff and have it happening, but it's already hard enough to communicate to the player what's going on with just basic stats and basic leveling up and basic roles and classes, and also having this kind of communicating relationship stuff at the same time that might not be super useful to a lot of players, might not just care about at all.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you surface that? How do you actually communicate it? How much should it mechanically entwine with, you know, the other systems in the game?
Yeah.
It just raises a lot more problems.
My feeling is there's like a common designer's instinct, like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if like what you do in the gameplay has an effect on the story and vice versa, and like tangle those things together as much as possible. And then in practice as a player, you usually end up resenting that stuff because it's like, well, I really like this guy's fun ability, but I don't really care about that character in the story. So now I've got to like shelve him because actually I want to level up this bond and I've got to play with those two characters. I don't really like their mechanics, but plot wise, I want them to get together.
Right.
I actually think it's better to keep those two things separate. And like, if you want two characters to get together, make that a dialogue choice, and just those two characters are going to have a conversation and you get to choose how they talk to each other and like what their relationship is. And that isn't, you don't have to have played with those two characters on every single mission up until that point, or you don't have to sacrifice like how you want to play the game to do that.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's why it works so well in BioWare games where, they're never mechanically super strong, really, like as games. And also the relationship stuff is separate from the combat systems. Like, they're very, very separate parts of the game and almost feel like they're developed by different people. But, the plot stuff has genuinely forks and changes based on the relationships that you have with characters in a BioWare game. And I don't know how you do that with XCOM, really, beyond bonuses, but Fire Emblem does it well. Like,
yeah. I think being at a remove makes it easier because it's like, oh, nice for those two. I don't really need to intervene with their lines.
That's true.
You know. Next question comes from Peter, who writes, is Artifact a dead game? And I don't want to dwell on this because I know that I'm like the number one Artifact fan, and there's been a lot of stories in the news recently about it losing 95% of its players and all this stuff. I can only speak from anecdotal evidence, but I have seen no change in the speed at which you find a game of Artifact.
Yeah.
And I played that game in closed beta when there were 300 people in the world and it took 10 minutes to get a game. And, you know, yesterday during my lunch break, so we're talking 1:30 PM UK time, middle of the day, I loaded it up, pressed play, and was playing immediately. So I don't know. Like, it doesn't feel like it. It feels like those narratives can kill a game even if they're not actually dead, which sucks. I think it's obviously going to kind of struggle, and I suspect it's probably got some kind of reinvention in its future, but it's still a game I like a lot, and I've seen no practical evidence as a player that its player base is suffering. In fact, I suspect that the stats people are leaning on for those stories are not wholly representative of its whole fan base, particularly because there's a lot of players in China, for example, and I don't know if they're being tracked in the same way, for example. You know, there's lots of things that could be potential answers for that particular thing.
Player numbers, like, it is an online game. Like, it is about getting a game. Like, so it's reasonable for people to cover the fact that a fan base is shrinking or a player base is shrinking. But yeah, you should back that up with testing how easy it is to get a game, because that's fundamentally the point. But they could relaunch it at any time and introduce a load of new kind of like progression mechanics and stuff that might actually keep people playing it. But they didn't do any marketing around that game. They didn't market it at all, really. They had Rich Garfield doing some boring YouTube videos about upkeep costs and stuff, but Valve just didn't push it out properly.
Yeah,
that wasn't part of the.
I think they in some ways let the narrative be determined for them.
Yeah,
and it became about the payment stuff, and it's far less egregious than most games like that. It's just badly communicated.
They left it at the very last minute to announce even how it looked. Like, it was. I mean, this is why marketing people do get paid quite a lot of money to try and manage this stuff and control the story around these games, because it has an effect and it's really important. And, Artifact's a fucking cool game. I really like it. I don't like enough to spend £100 on it, which is kind of what I feel I need to actually unlock its true potential. And that is a truth about the game that perhaps needs to be communicated earlier, like what type of game this was. Like, this is going to be a hardcore thing.
This is a high investment hobby.
It's a high investment hobby game, and the rewards are going to be rad. There's going to be tournaments. There's going to be loads of stuff. Actually get a lot of those people who are in the early stages of the beta and testing it to stream it and market it for you and do all that stuff. And just none of that happened.
They did do that.
Yeah.
But just not very broadly. Like, they did give individual cards to like high profile Hearthstone players to reveal and things like that. I think they'd made a definite attempt at marketing. I just don't think it worked.
No. The game's cool though. The game is really cool. Valve has the resources to keep it alive, and 6 months time, relaunch it with a new progression system. And yeah. I
mean, they already added a progression system. They they probably just need to.
They didn't tell us, PC Gamer.
Yeah.
They didn't tell.
They did a blog post about it.
Okay.
But yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
I know the blog posts on the internet. Like, no one's just going to stumble across that. You've got to actually put it out there. You've got to, push out and make the message happen.
Yeah. Luke writes, other than Let's Play archives by talented amateurs, do any of you all know any other long-form gaming playthroughs like Tom F's 2 Galciv pieces? That's from Luke.
I wanted to give a shout out to Robin Birkinshaw's Sims Diary, Alice and Kev, which is
I think it's been appearing in like Crate and Crowbar and PC Gamer show notes since.
It's one of the all-time greats, and you should read it. You don't need to know anything more about it.
Yeah, that's the thing that springs to my mind as well.
Yeah, for sure. It depends what you mean by long form, I suppose. Like, we run loads of diaries all the time, but in terms of like super long form stuff,
like a wee book,
like a the which is what I was talking about.
Exactly.
The Galciv diaries ran in like a tiny book.
The second one was a tiny book,
which was lovely.
Actually, just to give a shout out, Robin is about to release a Sims 4 mod that is like modding the emotion system in Sims 4. I don't know a lot about it, but he just tweeted about it recently, and this is newsworthy to me because he tweets about once every 3 years.
Yeah.
Which is the right amount, if you're wondering. That's the right. That's
correct.
Yeah. Next, Takuna writes, Watcher, I know virtually nothing about game development outside what I hear on this podcast, and I'm always a bit confused about critiques surrounding game engine choice. On the one hand, you hear the usual mob bemoaning that something was made in Unity or some such, and then on the other hand, there's another camp that claims that the engine itself really makes no difference to how the game ultimately turns out or feels. But why then is it that some engines feel so obvious when you play games made with them? There's something distinctly Source about Source, although I'd have trouble describing it. And engines like Quake can be quite discernible, with no prior knowledge as to what was used as well. So if a developer can take almost any game engine and turn out basically whatever they want, what is it about the engines that give them a particular signature when played? Lots of love and kisses. Takuna.
So I think there's a big self-fulfilling prophecy here for people who think they are like, oh, this game made in this engine, you can tell it's made in this engine. You only think that when you already know what engine is made in. And so there are a lot of people who don't know heat signatures made in GameMaker, even though I openly say that all the time and it, couldn't be more public about it. It's still a surprise to many people. And so anyone who doesn't, it didn't follow its development, didn't have any particular reason to find that information out, plays it, never finds out it's made in GameMaker, unless you watch the credits and get to that point. And even then, you've got to be paying attention to notice, oh, that's, when they say GameMaker, they mean that's the engine it was made in. Oh, okay. And then you've got to know what GameMaker is, and you've got to know what Unity is. And so, yeah, it's a big self-fulfilling prophecy. Even with Gunpoint, people would sometimes be surprised that Gunpoint was made in GameMaker, which seems ridiculous in retrospect, because it's like, that's exactly what you make in GameMaker. It's a 2D side-on platformer. That's what GameMaker is good for. But GameMaker was kind of cursed for a long time, and still is to a lesser extent, with the thing of things made as test projects, when people are learning the ropes for the first time ever, that they made in 1 week, that they put out there. Everyone knows those are made in GameMaker.
Yeah.
But not everyone knows the Hyperlight Drifter was made in GameMaker or Hotline Miami, unless that's a big, thing that
Hyperlight Drifter was made in GameMaker?
Yeah. Huh. And I wish I had an encyclopedic knowledge of that stuff, because there are, 8 other examples that, some of which might be surprising. To any given person. So yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that if you can't tell what engine it's made in, you don't know what engine it's made in, so you don't get to expand your mind about what that engine can do, because you don't find out. And yeah, there was a time when Unity had a feel. Unity, if someone hasn't changed how Unity starts up, then you see this familiar dialogue, and it's like, this is...
Talk about that, yeah.
Yeah. And that has become almost a meme now, in terms of the quality settings.
Yes.
You leave this dialogue. It's a really useful window just to have something that launches before your game launches, that lets you set the resolution and the quality settings and controls and stuff. Yeah. Because if you get the resolution wrong when you launch your game,
you'll restart it.
The player doesn't know you got it wrong, and they're just like, what the fuck happened? I don't know. I can't change anything. Yeah. So there is a reason to have a little Windows dialog box, as amateurish as it looks. But then you can name those quality settings, and there is a whole, I feel like there's a whole genre of, of comedy that in naming those settings. Yeah. West of Loathing just has good, bad, and ugly, which is really good for a Western game. Yeah. And I can't remember the, Mysterious Island Frog Mystery Grace Bruckner game one, but I remember them being great.
Yeah. It's partly because the Unity defaults of good, great, fantastic is a tremendous cop out. Yes. From whoever wrote that default text.
Yeah.
That is a complete abdication of responsibility.
And it always defaults to mediocre or something for some reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were a million Unity games. For example, I don't think Firewatch has that menu when you start it up. There are a lot of Unity games that do not do that. Hearthstone is a Unity game. I don't know if people know that.
Yeah, precisely. I feel because and I have this thing of I feel like I know what you're talking about when you think you can identify a FPS engine, particularly on a feel basis, because the Source engine for me is an echoey room and the ability to throw cans. But
every time there's a level low, the sound stutters and stuff.
Yeah, that sound as well. Yeah. This is we're at risk of wandering back into that kind of weird Quake ASMR territory. But that is those are what I'm describing there are specific features of Half-Life, not things that you have to do with the Source engine. Because Dota is in the Source engine.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons the Source engine has a more distinctive feel than some other engines is because Valve don't license it out that much. So most of the Source engine games are made by Valve. Yeah. So all of the Valve, institutional knowledge and habits and practices will be in there that aren't necessarily a requirement of the engine.
Well, also literally half of the, for years, half of the, sorry, that doesn't work sound effects in Dota were taken from Half-Life. If you clicked it, it was just going and in a fantasy game, because fuck it. Why make 2 sound effects that mean no?
But then Xenoclash was Source, right?
Yeah.
You play that, you're well, how would you ever tell? Unless you're really technically minded and understand the difference between engines precisely, you're just not going to know.
Stanley Parable.
So it feels like the quirks of these engines almost come out through their UI. So it's almost the particular grey loading screen in original Source and, in the Half-Life 2 engine. So that small map thing where you have to constantly load quite often, and these days it's very fast, but a little grey box pops up and a very specific loading screen pops up. It's like, oh yeah, I'm in Source now. And that's what kind of identifies.
It's like there's going to be a generation of players in the future that don't know what it means to switch from the game you're playing to a lower resolution BINC video. Of a thing that is happening to the characters you were just looking at.
Yeah.
And like that, what's happening when that's happening, but it has nothing to do with the,
I'm old enough to remember like the era when it flipped from like, oh, now the in-engine stuff looks better than the shitty BINC video. Whereas in the olden days, the BINC video always looked amazing and like the in-engine stuff was terrible.
Whatever happened to BINC?
Good old, I believe BINC is part of RAD video game tools.
A series of like natural ones rolled on the video game naming table.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. From BINC to RAD.
The saddest axis.
Yeah, the syllables that we have had to say. What next one? Maybe, perhaps, yes. Billy writes, Probe and Pylon. I do not know if you've been keeping up with StarCraft 2. I've recently got back into watching the professional scene and even picking up a game or two, meaning that I've caught a few streams. After sitting down after work today, I tuned into a StarCraft 2 pro game against an AI, which I suppose is another honk on the doom horn for humanity. The AI won, doing weird left field strategies. In short, what do you think about the application of AI to competitive games? And could this application apply more broadly to video games? Also, are we all going to die? Keep up the good work, Billy.
Sadly, we are all going to die.
We will all die.
It may not be
not necessarily from a StarCraft.
If I am slain by a StarCraft bot,
that's a
this
good
is
way
to
to
this
go.
episode.
Yeah, that's a good way to
enjoy
go.
the irony.
But surely the fun thing about competitive play is that it's one human beating another human. Like, even if you have
People
AIs,
have enjoyed watching that for time immemorial.
Yeah, I mean, computers have sort of solved chess, but we still have really.
Yeah, it's about the, people trying to overcome their own limitations, right? This is the best analogy is, it is still fun to watch a foot race, even though cars exist.
Something else could do this better.
If one day Elon Musk were to show up at the fucking 100-meter sprint and go like, I've made a rocket. And you'd say, fuck off, Elon.
I mean, that's what
not the point.
It's what you'd normally say to Elon Musk.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
In many contexts, but yeah, even especially.
Exactly.
It is such
you would tell him to piss off, and for good reason, because the point is not, how fast can this be done? It's how fast can a human do it? Because that's principally what we're interested in as humans.
I do find it really interesting when AI finds a weird strategy humans never would have considered that turns out to be super effective, especially because it kind of, not because it reveals something about the AI, but because it reveals something about the humans. It's like,
yeah, right.
I can't remember a lot of specifics, but Alex has talked about a sort of AI competition where they had to they introduced AI, that could sort of, design ships or something, and its strategy was just incredibly degenerate. It was just like, I just want the maximum number of ships, all of which have 2 damage or something, and that just wins. And they had to just sort of fudge the rules to say, you can't do that. You can do something else, but not that.
There's,
that tells you, like, humans had access to that. They could have done that, and it would have won, but nobody thought to do that because there's something in their brain that told them, no, that doesn't make sense, or it wouldn't be effective, or there's some reason that doesn't work out. And the AI just has no such preconceptions. It's just like, I'll just try everything. Oh, that works super well. We'll do that.
There was a good example of this recently. Like, I think, because you're right, what this always reveals is the question being asked by the original human rather than the AI itself. At the moment, there's a really good example of this recently, and I'm going to fudge this, I suspect, because more than 2 bottles of wine, and also it was a while ago, but there was an example of an AI that I think was tasked with generating a sort of Google Map style abstract street map from an original satellite image. And then I think the idea was, can it also I think the question was either like, can it get the sort of logic of the roads right from a satellite image? And can it, sort of be, used to sort of, the question was essentially for the AI, like, does it logically understand the logic of these roads in a way that it could generate a realistic satellite image from the original data? I think that's right. It might be wrong. The point is that the AI instead just developed a way of cheating at the test it was being set by inventing its own form of steganography, where it would encode the original satellite image into the data of the abstract image. So when it was asked to like, how can you regenerate? And because people figured this out because its recreations were, I think, uncannily accurate. Like it would know where the trees were. There was no way it could know that. And it's because it knew what it was being tested on, because that's what it was, the criteria for success were. So it would just find a way of hiding that data. So there were sort of imperceptible layers of data in the sort of gradations of beige, basically like a watermark or steganography on top of the image that concealed all of the data it needed to completely reconstruct the original satellite image. And that's really cool because it's like,
what scares me is we're going to say, like, we're going to tell AI, hey, no, we see you're cheating, don't do that. And then it's just going to get better at cheating. Because like us as humans listen to that and think, oh, we know how to cheat on tests. You don't like encode information that you couldn't possibly have. You think about what it's feasible that you could have had.
Be sentient, damn it.
Once AIs can do that, that's even worse.
Yeah.
Did you see that thing about, on the Xbox, not 360, but the previous one, like I guess the original Xbox, like or maybe it's a previous version of the interface, but your little Xbox Me or whatever it's called, avatar, has little rings pulsing on its feet.
Oh, I didn't see this.
Encoded in the frequency of those rings is a unique ID to you. So if you leak a screenshot of the Xbox interface ahead of time, they can look at those rings. I think one screenshot is not enough, but if there's a video, they can totally do it. And if there's a couple of screenshots, they can figure it out. They can measure the distance between the rings to figure out the serial number of your Xbox and know who you are.
I love the idea based on this kind of procedural cheating we're talking about, which, I think came up with the last episode as well. Like the idea that we perhaps might need to really patronize AIs and just sort of pretend like, oh, you got me. And then just leave all those flaws in place so that in future we can like actually see, like, oh, just let's allow this system to think that this is a good way of, is obviously at that point it becomes redundant because it's not going to do the job you wanted to do. But, There's built-in flaws.
I think there is something in trying to watch someone, like, again, this is the thing I always come back to. It's about the human drama. Like there is mileage in watching a person trying to overcome the AI or trying to overcome a system. That's the heart of speedruns, for one thing. That has legs because, again, it's a personal drama. And even to the extent we're watching two AI going at it, not kissing this time, but, simply fighting, is in a sense Robot Wars. It's still about the people who made the robots. You know what I mean? Like it is like Turtles, kind of people all the way down with this sort of thing. So I don't think you can ever say like, are we all doomed? Like essentially, to answer that part of the question, are we doomed? No, because it's presently everything we find interesting about AI is really what we find interesting about the people who framed its bounds or established its interest level, you know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'd be interested to know if you could give a deep learning algorithm like a list of materials and ways to build robots so that it could design Robot Wars contestants and then see how the AI
And that's how Tom Francis destroyed the world.
But then presumably it would become about the person who builds the best robot to design the best robot.
Perhaps. Because, like, the wedge thing in Robot Wars was kind of like, humans finding a bug in the system, but I bet if you put AIs to the task, they'd find a different bug that defeats the wedge.
It's the universe's deadliest foe, like the mobile doorstop. Like, we can't,
it's a doorstop, but it can move.
It can stop a door, and that's the thing we use to secure everything in the world.
I love that at one point the Robot Wars meta was Wedge versus Hypnodisc. And that was like a legit kind of like, what do middle-aged British men and their sons do in garages now that Hypnodisc has been invented?
Exactly.
Like, what is the counter?
What was
this?
The Hypnodisc?
It was basically just a small oblong with a very big disc on the front that rotated and at greater and greater speeds with little kind of nodules on it that gave it weight. And as soon as it contacted in even the slightest manner with another robot, the other robot would just fucking melt. It was just obliterate it. So wedges would come and try and get underneath it, and like it could be flipped, and it had no like self-righting mechanism, which is a part of the Robot was messed up at the time. And And yeah, you know, if this thing just touched the flipper or part of the wedge, just all these like very carefully, you know,
I feel like we've got
armor panels would shatter into the stadium, basically.
I feel like we've got an international listenership that may not be aware of Robot Wars, in which case what I need you to imagine a time where in the 90s, Britain embarked on a series of kind of like dystopian Mad Max battles to the death between Roombas. And did this, because it was the 90s, I think. The early noughties, maybe?
Craig Charles was there.
It
was good.
Like all sci-fi scenarios.
Yeah. Like any given club in Bristol. Craig Charles was there. And
there was a referee called Sir Killalot, which was himself a giant robot.
He had like a hammer, I think.
I think he had a spear that was useless, and I don't know, one of them had a flamethrower. It's very blurry.
It's very blurry because it was on a CRT TV.
Yes.
Good.
Robot Wars meta. It was about time we talked about that on the Robot podcast.
Flipping or hypno wheel.
I really want to ask Mike Cook about Robot Wars now. I could have valuable opinions.
Oh no, let's not get into it. Let's just not.
Oh boy.
Did everyone try making a really hot robot? Like,
what do you mean?
Superheated so it melts the other robot.
See. I thought you meant sexy, because I thought we were getting into the XCOM meta. Like,
Mass Effect tried that.
Yeah, exactly.
There's what that. No, I can't keep going into like Robot Wars stories. I just can't. It's fine.
I feel like if we cover off like Warhammer 40k and Robot Wars in a single sentence,
it's too much, isn't it? It's too much.
Like, yeah.
Robot Wars.
All right. Aiden writes, "Hi, in your latest pod, Tom came to a late realization of the joke in the title of Fortune 499. I've had a similar experience with a couple of puns that were written by Americans. I'm from Suffolk and sound closest to Marsh. There's an owl in Kingdom of Loathing that teaches you the game called the Toot Oriole. I only recently realized that this was a pun on tutorial. Secondly, some American Pie derivative has a jock shout, what comes before part B, part A? When it should clearly be, what comes after part D, part E.
I love how just like scholarly and sensible that sounds.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, logically it would be E.
Can you think of any puns you did or didn't get? Thanks, Aiden. I think that's mostly just a very good email.
Yeah.
This is, it's also a pet, topic of mine. I'm fascinated by the game titles that have puns in them that people don't get, because it's like Invisible Ink is a classic one.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize it's a pun. It's spelt like Invisible Incorporated, but it's a pun on Invisible Ink, as in an ink that disappears.
No, I didn't.
I thought for a second. One that took me years to get was Murdered Soul Suspect, which is spelt like soul as in your spirit. But obviously it also is a play on being the only suspect, which I didn't get for ages.
I think they fucked that for a lot of reasons. It's not a very good game, but also because it's a subtitle. It should just be called Soul Suspect. If it was called Soul Suspect, that'd be fine. And then the pun would stand alone. But because it's Murdered, Soul Suspect, it just doesn't quite.
Yeah.
Murdered is a bad name for a game as well.
No Man's Sky, it's not like a pun or a sort of play on words exactly, but it's a riff on obviously No Man's Land. And, I tweeted that because I had a thread of these things going of things people were like, oh, and one of the people who went, oh, on No Man's Sky was Will Porter, who is a writer on No Man's Sky.
I never really particularly liked the No Man's Sky pun because I don't think that's the part of No Man's Land you'd necessarily pull out as like switch outable necessarily. Like you could go for like Some Man's Land. Like, I get where you're going with that.
You think it should have been called Some Man's Land?
Yeah, exactly.
Not all. I think
it should have been called Not All Man's Land. That's what also it makes me think of One Man Guy by Rufus Wainwright, and maybe also Loudon Wainwright. I'm not sure if it's both of them. Yeah. Sorry, that was a complete fucking moment. Anyone else got any puns they don't understand?
I can't think of any at the moment.
There's got to be some involving Z and Z, right? Like some, I mean, like,
is DayZ an intentional pun?
We all say Daisy, right? No one really says DayZ.
Yeah, but like, what's the purpose of it being Daisy?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sure that wasn't intended.
The only American Z pun that doesn't translate at all that I can think of off the top of my head is the Lazy Boy chair, which is not a game, it's a chair. But Lazy Boy doesn't work. Oh, damn it. There's a band with Z in the name that doesn't work if you say a Z.
That, listeners, was 6 seconds of dead air. Or at least it felt like it. Next is this Serif, who writes more with information than a question. Tom, you look like you're about to answer a thing that hasn't been asked.
ZZ Top?
I mean, it sounds worse in British English. It's not really like a pun in American English, right? Is it?
See, no, I don't think it is. I think it's just a name. I think it is just a name. I don't think there's a... If you're American and ZZ Top is a reference, then please let me know, because it's been years.
There's like EZ used a lot in American things, like EZ.
Easy, yeah, EZ, yeah.
In fact, maybe even GGEZ is a thing people say in like Overwatch and shit, that like, if you pronounce it in British English, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
GGEZ, what was that?
Yeah. EZ.
Good game, good lizard.
What are we talking about? We've had too much wine.
Sorry,
the last and final email that we have time for is from Virtherif, who writes with less a question, more a pro tip. Dear CNC, do you like googly eyes? I like googly eyes. Try clicking the 8 in the title of the Crate and Crowbar Discord Game of the Year page. And I can verify that if you do this, then, and we will link it again in the show notes, good job getting it into the show notes for a second time, then yes, they do gain the nominees excellent and very well implemented googly eyes, not least the Obradin compass.
Yeah, I was very impressed by this.
And while you're at it, Virterif writes, hover your mouse over Subnautica's well-deserved goatee ribbon for 8 seconds. You can thank Discord later. What this results in, and I kind of want to just...
Are you going to spoil it?
Should I?
You're going to ZZ spoil it?
I think you should. Because I don't think it's enough of a plot thing.
Yeah.
People are going to
Plot thing.
It adds the secret result 0.
And people have had a sufficient warning now. If they want to try it for themselves, they can pause now.
Yeah.
Spoilers for a joke I don't know how was started that I live with. It becomes, and I think Kane even maybe tried to tease this. It becomes in 0th place, therefore the actual game of the year, or indeed off the scale, and therefore maybe the worst game of the year, is, my photoshopped face. And then you're treated to a montage of my face, photoshopped in various ways. Sometimes not photoshopped. Sometimes it's just a screen grab from a movie I made as a student. And I think
horrifying fate.
Yeah, exactly.
In many ways. But also the googly eyes things.
But also the great thing about this, and the thing I really truly appreciate about it, is the googly eye gag has also been applied to the photoshopped photos of me from various points in the last decade and a bit of my life.
Okay. If you're interested in that niche.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that is a Venn diagram that I didn't even really think either circle would exist. And the fact that it does is a source of, I guess, just reflection more than anything else.
Industries of Titan. That's another pun title that not everyone gets. And it's a play on Titans of Industry.
Oh.
Hey, we had a legit And I interviewed Andy Wynn, who's the sort of creative director on that project. And he also did not get it when he joined the project, or when he was first approached about it, he didn't get the title. So,
Tom, I really appreciate you taking this time to return to answering a different question than the one literally about
I knew there were more. I knew there are others that are in the back of my head.
Good. That is all of the questions and emails and things we have time for this evening. If you'd like to send us one of them for this, you may do. Doing so involves emailing questions@crateandcrowbar.com or tweeting us at crateandcrowbar. Thanks as ever to our Patreon supporters, What Who Done Back Us on Patreon. find out how the Patreon do at patreon.com/Crate and Crowbar. We have a YouTube for some reason. youtube.com/Crate and Crowbar. You may also find our Discord, which is excellent and full of people who are very good at jokes and thoughts.
And eyes.
Comprised of all those things, like a shoggoth. Like a funny shoggoth. You may find it on Discord. The link is in our website. crateandcrowbar.com. I'm sorry. Finally, if you'd like to follow us as individuals on Twitter, I can be reached at cthurston, that's CTHURSTEN.
Was that nice?
Still thinking about Robot Wars.
We lost Tom Senior about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, sorry, I've been thinking
to a
about
kind of like
this entire time.
fugue state.
Yeah,
just
sorry.
if you need to know anything about what Robot Wars, just watch the spaced episode about Robot Wars.
Yeah.
Which
Yeah, it's
is
a good one.
very
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Involves the robot named War Bastard, which has influenced all of my thinking ever since I heard
I think it's influenced all of British indie game development.
Yeah, for sure. I'm on Twitter. I don't use it very much. But nonetheless, if you want to see a picture of Brendan Fraser's face wrapped around a paint tin as my avatar, then you can encounter that at pcgludo.com. It's not .com. It's Twitter.
Someone find out that like pip.biz, which is what Pip gave her contact details for on the last pod, is actually like a site with a contact form. Please do not fill in the pip.biz contact form. It isn't real Pip. We didn't, we don't know who you're giving your details
Cannot
to.
be reached in that
We're
manner.
not one of those cool podcasts that registers like 17 different URLs and they're all like funny jokes.
Yeah. One day, Tom. One day.
I do use Twitter a lot and I'm at Pentadact. PENTADACT.
Good for Tom.
Lovely.
And good for the causes of Tom.
That's what the Conservative government said.
That's the creative crowbar man. Fucking hell. Thanks for listening, everybody.